Welcome to Men's Work That Works, Manology Exploring 21st Century Masculinity. We're here with Dr. John Olaf, who will be introducing our guest speaker today, David Hatfield. And I just wanted to give a quick reminder before we start in terms of how people can post questions and engage in the dialogue, and that they're welcome to do that throughout the session as well as at the end when we'll open up it to a wider dialogue. And so we invite people to either email. They can email me directly, marilee.hughes@nursing.ubc.ca, and that's in the Google Plus information at the bottom. Or you can log in directly with a Google or Gmail account to post questions in the chat box directly on the website. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to John to introduce David.
So it's my pleasure to introduce David Hatfield. I could read the official bio, perhaps I won't. I first met David, I reckon, about 7 or 8 years ago, and he showed up and had a meeting with Paul Gaudos, who was here doing some men's health work, and myself, and it was so great to meet you and then to be involved in the Manology course, which is a nice community-based course that brings guys together to engage in all sort of issues that are related to health. So there's kind of done some amazing work with over 20,000 boys and men in Australia and Canada, and really Costa Rica as well, New Zealand, Spain, and the US, and more recently China. And so it's a terrific honour to have you with us today. We're doing lots of work in men's depression and suicide, and obviously your work has foregrounded a lot of the stuff that's followed, including our work, right? So I'm really pleased to have you in the room, and I hear you have no PowerPoint as well. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I mean, that is lovely. I think that's innovative in and of itself. No PowerPoint. That's very, very good. So I'm really delighted to have you here and looking forward to the conversation. I want to preempt that I have to sneak out of the room just before the end, but we discussed that, so it's okay.
Thank you very much, John and Marilee. Thanks very much for having us.
Pleasure.
Yeah. So I wanted to invite those who are online live to feel free to chime in with some questions along the way, and the two of you as well, anytime. So I wanted to speak about the Manology course as a response to a lot of other things that I'd seen going on in the world around men's work and bringing men together to look at issues. And so I'll probably start with a bit of the history of the course there. I started my work in masculinity with working with boys, teenage boys, doing sexual assault prevention and violence prevention work for many years in high schools predominantly, and got really interested soon into that process with issues beyond violence. It seemed like the boys were very interested in any kind of open discussion about anything that had pertinence for them, because that's not what they feel like they get a lot of in school. But there were so many other issues bubbling up to the surface that program didn't really have license to look at. So when I left that area and went into my own self-employment work, I gave myself permission to go after everything. And I wanted to start working more with men as well as young men and boys. And I actually took part in a process for a grant proposal through the Echo and Green Foundation in New York. And as a result of that, did a ton of research on other programs for men, other programs done by folks like myself, independent folks, through university courses, through social services and healthcare organizations, and really found this big polarization between things that were offered. On one hand, I would say places that men actually don't want to be, which is in counseling, in court-mandated anger management programs, etc. So places that have a lot of stigma attached to them, and also kind of somewhat where a man is kind of acknowledged, hey, I'm in some pretty deep water here, things are going off the rails, and nobody wants to be in that position in the first place. Or on the other side, you had quite somewhat high-priced, expensive retreats, so often done by, again, independents like myself or smaller organizations, and they both were doing good work. And at the same time, some of the negatives I saw, I named some of the ones on the social service side. On the retreat side, it was, you need the money and the time to be able to go to a retreat. So that leaves a lot of men out. And the second part was very little follow-up, and it's kind of a big experience with not much integration afterwards. And oftentimes a lot of secrecy and sometimes some pretty criticized work that nobody had really had a chance to see very openly. So I decided, after trying a few retreats myself, leading them and running into the same problem like continuity and sustainability for myself as well as for the men, I decided that I really wanted to pull back and try and build something that was very in the middle. So something that had elements of a men's group, so it had connection, intimacy, vulnerability could emerge, and at the same time some kind of educational process. I know a lot of small men's groups get started and they don't last that long because there's a lack of leadership, or there's infighting, or they kind of get stale. And so Manology was an attempt to do that. So it was an experiment, and it's proved to be a successful one. So I'm sticking with it. So the sort of hallmarks of Manology, the way I wanted to set it up, were something community sited. So we're actually just located in a downtown community center. Everybody can access it. It's on their website and their program guide, as well as my promotional stuff. It's cheap. I figured if you can pay for a movie, you could pay to go to Manology. So it's about $13 or $11 if you register. So it's about the cost of a film. It's ongoing. So I think that's one of the key hallmarks, and it's drop-in. There's no commitment required to sign up for a whole 12 weeks at a time. So guys can come whenever they want to, whenever they feel like it, whenever there's something being offered that's really pertinent to them. And it's affordable, and they can experiment with dropping in and dropping out. So I have 3 stories I thought of that have really spoke to me about the nature of that course, and in particular, what I was trying to do is remove barriers to participation, make it easy, remove excuses, remove hesitation, remove reluctance. So one of these are 3 stories, or 3 kind of dynamics that have emerged, and they apply to more than one man, but they're taking them as kind of hallmark stories. And they're all guys who are pretty involved in the community, so that they've been there for a while. So these aren't guys who flipped in and out. One man came, and we start with a check-in circle every night, and guys have a chance to just say, "How are you? What's going on for you?" We often time them because we've got a lot of guys in the room, and we do a content piece afterwards. So they've got between 3, 5, 6, 7 minutes to work with. And one of the men came in one time to say, there had been a death in his family. And he went on to speak about grief and so on. But I was immediately curious that he didn't name who the death was. And I won't reveal the rest of his story, but approximately 18 months later, he actually finished that story. And he acknowledged that he'd spoke about that story many times in the circle. And then life went on to other things, and his story changed, as they do. And some 18 months later, he spoke to who had died and the manner of the death. And he acknowledged that this has taken a long time for him to do, based on his own comfort level and readiness. And that if nothing else, that story highlighted for me the importance of ongoingness in community. And it's simple enough, and I knew that. But to have him as a very confident, self-assured man to speak that with such precision and knowledge of his own experience was beautiful. Another man who's quite a common participant, has been there a number of years, has spoken about there's a few men in the group that have some anxieties or social anxiety, and he's acknowledged that sometimes he gets almost to the door and then goes home. Now, if this was a one-off, men's retreat workshop or something, and he almost signed up but didn't, that kind of could be the end of it. Just like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm never going to try. And then another man who went through a similar dynamic at the beginning of kind of trying it out, and unbeknownst to me completely, kind of sitting there with a lot of silent judgments about me and us and what we're doing and how we do it, and would disappear for a few weeks and then come back. And now has become quite a stalwart participant, and has become quite a substantially skilled facilitator himself, and is actually taught session 2 of the course as well. So this speaks to me again that there's so much stigma for men about going to a men's anything that has to do with the hint of vulnerability, the hint of openness or frank discussions, the risk of judgment. A lot of men just have a base fear of other men or a lack of trust. And so the ongoing, cheap, affordable, no commitment nature of Manology allows men to come and test their worldview, test their belief system against a group of men and repeating series of experiences, and to realize, no, actually I've got a lot in common with these guys, and I can relate to them on certain levels, and nobody's attacking me here, and actually what we did tonight is really pertinent to me. Or probably the most common thing is for men to just simply hear themselves in each other's stories at the beginning of the check-in. So those are a few things sort of connected to why Manology is formulated the way it is. Actually, I want to add one more thing. Manology is the only men's work I know of in the world, and I'm not knowledgeable about all men's work in the world, but I do try and keep my fingers on the pulse of the sort of English-speaking Western nations, and I also have a finger on the pulse through International Men's Day to other organizers and what's going on in other parts of the world, very different cultures. Is in Manology, I wanted to bring women right into it and not have it an exclusively male space. So we do what are called all gender sessions. And we try and do at least one per 12-week term, and sometimes we've done as many as 3 per 12-week term. And particularly on hot button topics. So to actually bring women into the room and to share, to make space for everyone's voice. We want women's perspectives on things. We want their response. We want to know their stories and their experience. And I also want women to see men's work being done in a certain way. I think that helps remove stigma on men's work in general. It helps, we don't live in a gender segregated world. There are lots of, places where there's more men or more women and so on. But the feedback we've had on the all gender sessions has been so positive that actually a Womanology course actually started on the east side a few years ago by two women who came to Manology kind of looking with some suspicion or expecting to not like it very much or see the same old. And they were so inspired that they decided that they wanted to try and start something that had a similar kind of value set. And so I was in support with them to help them get started. And it's been great. The men were kind of initially kind of nervous about it the first time the women came, and they've really come to appreciate it and enjoy it. So I feel very positive about that. And also, we name those nights all gender nights. We have had some trans folks attend some of our sessions as well, which is something that, again, another whole theme area I'd like to build on in the coming years. So those are kind of the hallmarks of the structure of Manology, how it's set up. And then there's a piece I want to speak about just briefly about the manner in which it's facilitated. So we do have a lot of guest instructors come, and I've become much more diligent about and choosy about who I bring in. The first year we just kind of threw it open and just let's try a lot of people, and now I'm looking for people who really have a pretty strong background in facilitation already, because the group is quite sophisticated in their group abilities. And really, there's a lot of people out in the community who really want to work with men. Like the idea of working with just a men's group that has a track record, that's done some good work together, and is really up for stuff, is really appealing to a lot of, from yoga teachers to medical professionals, activists, and other kinds of educators. They're really quite intrigued by it. And then, so we just have this kind of two-part manner of the check-in circle and then a content piece. And the content is driven largely now by feedback from the men. So we do a standalone feedback night after every 12 weeks. We just look back at everything we did and where we want to go from there. What do we feel done with? What do we want to do more of? And so the part of the delivery of Manology is really driven by men's voices. And the other part is that even there's a lot of improvisation that goes on from the design of the course down to the nuts and bolts during sessions. So I'm increasingly encouraging the men to not even wait for feedback sessions, but to be really vocal during sessions about what they want more and less of. So it becomes more of a self-directing organism that's always orienting towards what has the most relevance, what feels the most dynamic and useful, and is also the most enjoyable. So that kind of takes me a little bit further out of the picture in terms of design or having too much influence on the direction of things. I still keep my hand in for sure. There's things I think are important, and we'll put those forward. And as the culture, as events happen in the culture, we also want to have space to respond to those. So in a couple of weeks, we're actually doing a session that predominantly was driven by the case of John Gameshi and Bill Cosby recently, and that we want to look at those issues in a certain way. So to try and keep the structure and the flow really responsive to people. So I'm curious if anybody's piped in with any questions that you know of online there.
I don't see any in the chat box or in my email right now.
I got one.
All right.
Yeah. So these community-based programs are always so interesting, right? And sustainability is one of the issues. And so beyond you, but like, because you're a bit of a champion, right? So how do you, what are your measures at the moment or going forward about how you ensure sustainability? About how you cultivate that.
And sustainability being defined in this question as
that Manology runs forever.
Mm. Right.
These 13 weeks keep recurring forever. That way beyond your tenure.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've talked about this a bit in the past. Manology started as an experiment that was a response to the things I named earlier. And I was looking for something sustainable for myself as well. About a year or two ago, we really hit a peak in 2012. Our attendance almost tripled in a consistent manner. I really felt like I was in flow with themes and finding instructors. And the whole thing really coalesced. And about a year ago, I realized this has become now a pilot project with close to 150 sessions under its belt, at over 2,000 attendances. Like I started doing the numbers on it, I went, wow, this is fantastic. And yeah, now it needs to grow into a home. The community center siting has been really good. What I'd like to do to ensure a lineage beyond myself and sustainability is to greatly expand the whole course. And ideally, as we talked about, I'd like to house it in some kind of center. Men's wellness center, where this would be a large part of the educational part of it, and then having it surrounded with counseling, having it surrounded with medical and healthcare professionals who are interested in working with the male cohort of all ages. I'd like to see some kind of legal entity organization built around this, and in doing so, obviously, a whole lot of people need to come aboard as partners. I think there's a few of the instructors that I know now who'd be very happy being quite busy working with men a lot more often. And some of them have a very breadth and depth of experience and offering to bring to the table. So instead of a 12-week session with 3 themes, some of these instructors could easily go 12 weeks on their own theme. So men can come in if they really want a lot of depth, then that's available to them. And we've got a pool of close to 40 instructors who've taken part, many of which I would be extremely happy to throw the door open to. And so I think that's where it needs to go. And that represents a large learning curve for me because I don't have experience in creating a legal entity organization before. So having gone down that road a few steps, I mean, the learning curve is pretty steep. So yeah, I continue to look for partners, potential partners, supporters, financial support, consultants who can help me navigate some of those packages to unpack of education and legal infrastructure kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah. That's what I'd like to see.
Yeah, and I got one other one just for the that.
Oh, can I add one more thing? I feel like my belief now is Manology as a model. There's a template in there that could be trained and offered in other communities.
Yeah.
So that's another aspect of the same journey. Yeah. But I'd love to, I know there are men and women who are interested in working with men, and even now there's some folks here in Vancouver I've heard about, haven't been down in sessions yet, who are trying sort of from a coaching perspective to do things with men. And it sounds a bit more like presentation style, like they're up there with some guests, but more of a one-way presentation, and then a sort of, people can hang out and chat kind of thing. I know a few coaches in the past, in the 10 years I've been self-employed, have tried in Vancouver to get things going, and things have come up and disappeared and things. So I think Manology is pretty much a tested model, and that the hallmarks of it, I think, can be transplanted to other places. So it could be scaled.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I have these conversations with a lot of people who are community-based, especially at the moment, because there's a few different spots I've been sort of meeting people, and there's sometimes some tensions between men's movement and men's health. I'm just wondering what your take on that might be in terms of Manology.
Could you say more about the tensions that you've seen?
Yeah, the tensions that I see are things like that people want to predominantly do health, or that they might predominantly want to do something that's more about more health, more on the periphery, and more about men's rights.
Yeah, I come from a social ecology perspective, so a systems thinking perspective, and so my attempt is holistic views on everything. So yeah, what are called men's rights, which is a whole triggering label by itself. Men's health, men's mental health issues, masculinity issues, men's work. I mean, one of the pluses and negatives of this field is that it's so young. There are some labels attached. People have done some work, but there's a lack of very clear understanding about what it all means. So yeah, there's a lot of tension around men's rights activists or men's rights activism. I think because there's a lot of righteousness and a lot of anger and a lot of rigidity in some of those voices. They're championing those causes. I think those causes are legitimate and important. That's another reason I bring women in, is like, I don't want to be a part of something that excludes women, or doesn't want to listen to women's perspectives or trans perspectives and so on. For me, the root cause, and back to the Equine Green grant, I was asked a simple enough question, like, for the project you'd like to do for men, what's the root cause of the problems that you see that your initiative would help address? And I wrestled with that for a long time. My instinct was masculinity, ideas about masculinity, but then it's too easy, it's too quick. So I went on a big journey of exploring a lot of tangents and talking with a lot of people and back to a lot of reading. And I came back to like, no, I think that's what it is. So for my work, and I know in some of your publications, you've mentioned it in your discussions with some of the other doctors in town, masculinity gets mentioned a lot. And I'd say, predominantly that's what I'm interested in focusing on as an umbrella concept and terminology for everything. So men's health practices, their habits, their personal care habits, emotional, physical, relationship, their relationship to stress, drugs, alcohol, sexuality, the experience of men who've maybe lost their kids in divorce court, felt wrong done by, become a men's rights activist, has a lot to do with notions of masculinity. All that stuff does for me. And so far, what I've seen is, in the discussion that I've been a part of, in the journey that I've walked, that I don't hear a lot of contention that the perception, the socialization of what we call masculinity is not a problematic thing. That's something that's useful to be working on. And it seems to be an umbrella term that people can get behind, within which we can do the work of any direction. And again, another aspect, I didn't mention this earlier, one of the aspects of Manology that I wanted was transparency. I don't want to hide anything. We're in a community center, anybody can drop in, had lots of media attention. We invite women in, we're online, all of our instructors are posted, all of our sessions are posted. So there's nothing secretive about it. And really, I think a lot of the tensions that you're naming are part of a way bigger, this is sort of way beyond masculinity work for me, but it's a big part of my work life because conflict is another area I work in. Is that we're part of a society that's incredibly well trained in polarized and binary thinking. And So if I'm for men, then women's groups should feel threatened, or if I'm at a conversation with a bunch of women who run women's shelters, I'm supposed to feel threatened. I had a landmark conversation with a woman who used to be the director of a women's shelter in 100 Mile House area, and now is one of the senior managers of a violence prevention for women organization provincially. And we met, unbeknownst to me, we were going to meet in this session that I led on working with male youth up there a couple years ago. And we had an amazing exchange during the session and afterwards. And during the session, it kind of came out where she's coming from, and she was beautifully, courageously vulnerable in that session. And that inspired me to open myself the same way. And at one point I said, there's probably people in both of our worlds that would say, you and I should not even be talking to each other. And she said, oh yeah, that's totally true. And so I'm really interested in breaking down all those kind of silos. I'm interested in where the tension is and actually inviting those parties to be together. So some of the group process, all gender sessions we've done in Manology are on feminism, are on pornography, sexualized violence. Like those are the places where people just usually state their positionality and hold on tight and try not to lose face. And so we use some group process techniques that actually allow and invite very different kinds of energies to happen and allow for people to have more than one aspect, side, or position, and that there's no losing face and that is actually desired. And so it's a softer container, and I'm increasingly less and less even willing to be interviewed or take part in, be invited to something that feels like a setup, a good media smash up, where the two sides can get it on and state their positionality and try and prove that each other is wrong. So I appreciate the tensions, and for me they're conduits to conversations that we should be having, but we need to do those conversations in some kind of new way. Otherwise we get the usual polarity kind of, grenade lobbing kind of conversations. But I think we have to, and it goes again beyond. I could go up to climate change and economics, but I stay here with gender work. Anywhere there's entrenched positionality, we actually have to get past it, and it doesn't mean anybody has to give up their beliefs or their values. I think the skill that's required is how we bring people together, and our intention around doing that needs to be different. Yeah. And in gender work, that's a big part of it. Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah. What else can we talk about?
I do have a question.
All right, great.
Community-based men's groups seems to be more attractive for older men, 50 plus, while younger men seem to prefer individual support. Quite a challenge to reach younger men. Do you experience similar challenges with Manology?
So before I even answer, I want to invite that person to follow up with something that we can get and dig into later. I'm curious to know where the listener is, where are they getting that information about young men preferring individual one-on-one stuff? And I'll start off answering the question by saying I have a pretty good relationship with Big Brothers of Greater Vancouver, and also a program called Big Buddy in Auckland, New Zealand, who do the same work. And what they're finding is for young boys, yes. For young boys, so let's call them elementary school age boys, they do prefer one-on-one. Teenage boys don't want one-on-one, they want groups. And I work more with teenage boys than middle school or elementary age boys. And I would agree with that. So I'm curious. It's not a criticism, I'm simply curious. I have done a lot of work with boys and young men, teenage and adolescent guys, so I have connection. And so we do have in the Manology cohort, we've had from age 19 to like 72. And yes, the predominant age group would be sort of probably 30s and up for Manology. And part of me, I'm totally comfortable with that. It's fine. It feels natural. And young guys, when I was 24, I didn't want to go sit around with a bunch of old guys. And sit. The idea was we'd sit around and talk about stuff, because that didn't sound very exciting to me. And I hear or I perceive the questioner, the person asking the question here, as an interest in maybe intergenerational connection, and that I'm agreeing with that. I feel very strongly about that. So actually, in 2 weeks from today, we're doing an intergenerational session. So I've been cultivating this moment for several years, and I've invited a lot of students here at UBC. I've worked with several rites of passage programs and a university program here that I've been involved with for a couple of years. I take names, I get contact info, so the invitation's gone out, and just on the way here on the bus, I was texting back to one of the guys saying, I'll be there. I think it's incredibly important for, and not just for males, but for all of us, you know, what would be the term? Anyway, our society is really, ageism is another way we've adopted through public education to separate ourselves and isolate ourselves from others who are perceived to be different, in this case through age. So I'm also a rites of passage practitioner, and helping young people enter the world of adulthood. And one of the predominant themes is they look at us and we're stressed out and tired, we don't play anymore, we wear boring clothes, like whatever. They just look at us and go, we don't want to be adults, you know? And there's also, I think on a deeper level, an anger and a lack of trust that younger people who are watching the world, and of course they do when they start to become young adults, they're looking at how we've mucked it up. They're looking at what we've left them, and they're angry at us, and they don't want to be a part of that group. That's deeper conscious / unconscious stuff that in my perception. But you know, it's age old. We come from a human family that's 200,000 years old, so we've got a DNA in us that we can't sloganize or consume our way out of. And part of it is that older people need the vitality of younger people for inspiration, for energy, for stimulation. And young people benefit from the knowledge that older people can offer through lived experience. And for me, the link is broken, and we need to make that bridge again. So I've always included and invited young men to be a part of the Manology community. We've had a number of them over the years, and it's fantastic. And I see that dynamic happening. And increasingly, starting 2 weeks from now, we'll go after that dynamic to invite it more purposefully, more directly, more intentionally. I've seen some really good work in New Zealand, in the men's work there that I've seen, that the nature of their organization, their offerings, include families at certain levels, they're doing rites of passage work with boys, and a lot of the men who are involved in that network are bringing their sons in at every opportunity. So some of the sons have now become leaders in the men's work, just on the cusp of being old enough to do that. And that's a really good model. Yeah, and all the desired and hoped for outcomes are happening through that on a small scale, you know. But yeah, so I'm thanking the listener for their question. I'm wondering if they've come back.
They have. So there's a little clarification here, and that's I got this experience of a community-based men's health center in the province of Quebec. I'm not talking about teenage boys, but young adults.
So his perception was, or his experience, young adult men didn't want to be in a group setting. Mm-hmm. I got that right? Okay. Well, and that, you know, I don't doubt that your experience is true. I think that any group setting can feel, you know, boring or oppressive on the negative side. And so one of the things I really knock myself out doing is making sure that any group I'm running, including Manology, feels really dynamic and alive and fun, and that there's meaning and purpose in it. It doesn't feel dogmatic. You're not being lectured at all the time, but people are offering you experiences and information that are relevant and interesting, but not telling you how you're supposed to interpret them. So you get to make your own meaning out of it. And so you're allowed to do what you want with it, and to support other people to do the same. And again, that goes beyond men's work. So I guess I couldn't answer more than that, except to say I'd be curious to know what that kind of situation was in Quebec. Quebec's a province I don't know hardly anything about in terms of men's work and masculinity work. So I'm a little out of the loop with that. And thank you. And feel free to keep pushing that question if you want. So maybe I'll speak a bit about the nature of the men who are taking part in Manology. We've talked a bit about their age. In terms of sexual orientation, we're hugely overrepresented in gay men, and kind of not surprising in a way. We had a couple of gay men who are kind of part of the initial startup of Manology, who are friends of mine, and had been a part of some of the early retreats that I'd done here in Vancouver at the workshops, and they wanted to help steward this thing into existence. But gay men already have community. They already go to events. They already have intense conversations around the issues that they face and the celebrations of their community. So they're kind of more used to it and kind of more familiar with that kind of setting. And a couple of them came in, and I'm really proud of this, that one of the gay men who's been in our group for a long time has really said, a couple of them have really said, one of the reasons I come to Manology is to help myself not be heterosexist. And that I've really had some stories about heterosexual men that I didn't want to be around them, or I wasn't going to feel safe, or I wasn't going to feel included. And I don't feel that way in this group, So I'm really happy about that. I'm proud of that. A place I'd like to do better is with racial diversity. We've got a number of racialized men who've been in attendance. I'd like to see more of that. I'd like to see more young men as well. So there's areas of outreach and connection and relationship building I want to keep working on. And then in terms of socioeconomic status, again, I feel really proud of that. We've got lots of university students who have been involved, some under and unemployed men, some retired men, men who are making lots of money, professionals. We've got activists, guys between jobs, guys on disability. So it seems to be working okay as an invitation there that guys from different kind of socioeconomic strata can feel comfortable and welcome in the place. And I think the commonality of a Manology, of a man who shows up and continues to show up with some regularity, is a kind of openness, a kind of readiness to try out new things, to hear a difference of opinion and experience in men around him, to risk bringing himself forward and say, here's a bit more of who I am, or here's something that I'm working on lately that's finding challenging, or here's a question I've got going on. And we have lots of guys who come once and never seen again, and it irks me, and I don't have a way of figuring out, finding out what didn't work or what didn't fit. And one of the challenges in Manology I'd say right now that concerns me, and back to your question about where to go sustainably, is I want to move on to that next level. Partly because this cohort has gotten very, very sophisticated. And I can only imagine that for some of those men who come once, they walk in and we're at a level of depth they're not actually ready for a first hit. When they hear that first go around, they're like, whoa, this is a little too much, too fast. And I can really appreciate it. I can still remember going to my first couple of men's events and feeling that way myself. I'm not quite sure how to carry myself, or how much to say, or how do I do this? How does this work? So that's a plus. That's become a bit of a detractor or detracting dynamic for someone, I imagine. Maybe we could move on to just a couple of words on themes. So I mentioned earlier that Manology is driven a lot by what the men want to focus on. So I'm just going to read out a few themes here, and I'd be happy to have any response from you, or I might dig into a few of them myself. So some I could maybe characterize as pretty typical kind of men's work or masculinity stuff. So things about fathers, really every men's thing I've ever looked at fathers. We also looked at our relationship to our mothers. We've looked at issues of violence against women. We've had John in several times to look at depression in men as a health issue. Sexuality is obviously a big topic for men, and we've gone after that in a number of different ways, including sexual health with Dr. Elliott, Stacey Elliott. And then a number of things around sexuality, so from Tantra to, we're actually doing a couple coming up with one of our guys who's a facilitator, positive male sexual fantasy and creating sexual sacred experiences. And this is again in response to some of the conversations that came up around Jean Demeshi and the resurgence of sexual abuse. Even the idea of male sexual fantasy and looking at it, well, what's positive about that? Or what should we be, what is male sexual fantasy? I've never been in a conversation around male sexual fantasy in a group. So that would be breaking new ground. We've looked at issues around pornography as well. There's an ethic in our group that partly comes from me, but also some of the other men, around physicality. You know, we do want to talk, we do want to share ideas, but we also want to be in our bodies. So we've got one of our theme areas I've named Flex, Flux, and Flow, and also another one called Muscle and Bone. So anything to do with physicality. So we've had medical qigong, partner stretching, yoga for men, physical creativity and play. There's another ethic around creativity and creative expression. So we've done, I teach improvisational singing. So we've done lots of voice work, we've done some music. We had someone in the fall to do soul collage, which is a really cool facilitated process of collage and writing that produced some phenomenal outcomes, even in an hour. Creative play, we've had a couple of Vancouver activists and one who's a counselor who've come in to do creative play with us. So creative play with reflection. And that's actually one of the biggest edges I found in our cohort is play. That we've had several facilitators come in to work on play with us. And some of the guys have said, you know, I stayed away last week because I knew it was play, and it just brings back like being picked last on the team and all that childhood stuff. Other guys have and I really appreciate that. Other guys have come and said, wow, this is really edgy for me because I'm worried about looking dumb or not in control of things. So there's so much information there, so much learning. We've done a lot of work around relationships, relationship boundaries, acknowledging that one of the scripts for masculinity is to go, go, go. You know this from your work here, like to not look after yourself as well as you think, as well as you know you could or should be doing. So we did. I created a session years ago for a rite of passage program, and I decided to bring it to Manology called fermata. So fermata is the musical term for a pause in the music. It's not the end. Everything kind of stalls just exquisitely, ideally for a moment, and then carries on again. So we did a fermata session in December, where it was in silence. There was music playing. You were encouraged to just hang out on the floor and listen to music if you wanted to. There was some poetry or quotes on the walls. You could take in some words. You could do some drawing and doodling. You could hang out with another man if you wanted to, and just be with somebody or be on your own. So a number of stations around the room, and just to like actually slow down, stop, and take stock of yourself. So no information coming into you, no content piece. So encouraging men to slow down. We had a suggestion from one of our men around a practitioner in town who works on anger, specializes in anger. So we brought him in, and that turned into several weekend workshops with him now. And he came up with a beautiful title for that session called Natural Organic Anger, which I just love. So, it wasn't the cathartic, let's just get angry about stuff. It was learning about the nature of anger and how anger is different from violence, and the notion of the differences around boundaries and intention. And it was a real revelation for many of us to break anger down like that, and then have a chance to be angry for a couple of minutes in an extremely boundary way, physical boundary, verbal boundary, and to do it together, one man at a time. And for a very brief period of time, he's got an exquisite way of doing the work that's about not cathartic, actually. It's about learning the physiological symptoms of your anger, what anger feels like in your body, and then to have a chance to be angry. And I took part in all those workshops and was the timekeeper as well as participating. And I'd say easily that 90% of the men went straight to grief and were angry at all. What came forward was grief. So that was a huge learning for all the men to see that in themselves and each other. Then to learn that I can be extremely present to others. Even I've been invited to be in my anger journey and then to come back immediately and to look in other men's eyes and to hear feedback from men and to reflect on my own physiological and emotional experience of what I thought anger was about. And for some men, it was, I would say, life-changing. For a lot of other men, important, but not quite as intense as that. Another piece of work we've done is transformative or transformational breath work, which has been a huge catalyst in the Manology community. Several men now doing one-on-one sessions with the same practitioner. And I'd never experienced breath work like that before. So a lot of those men, I was assisting in those sessions. I'm not a practitioner, but I was just assisting as someone who knows the men. A lot of those men had been there the whole 4 or 5 years that it had been when we brought Ella Resmer, who's a local woman who does that work at a very high level. And I was thinking to myself, I've never seen or heard a lot of these men like this before. And it's an individual journey, but it's done simultaneously. The whole ring is doing activity. And a lot of men had some incredible, real powerful breakthrough things that are going on. And my own experience with breath work has been phenomenal as well. I've taken a number of sessions with her. So we try and get into the body. So at times we're just having fun. At times we're looking at really difficult social issues. At times it's very personal. At times it's very body-based. At times it's very issue-based. At times it's men and women, all genders together. In terms of numbers in a given night, we probably have, this year we're probably averaging around 14 to 16 men per night. In some of the bigger sessions, we've pushed close to 40 men and women in the room. Coming up, we've got Don Wright, who you may know from the BC Society for Male Survivors of Sexual Abuse. He's championed that cause very much on the periphery. I can't think of a more stigmatized male issue than that one. There probably are some, but that's very high on the list. So he's been the executive director of that organization since its inception 25 years ago, and he's coming in next week. So it's also great to be able to have a platform to bring people in who are doing good work in the community and can also leverage their own efforts, whether they're individual practitioners or organizations, or if you folks are looking for, we've done some collaborations on finding subjects for studies and so on. And I also feel like that's something that needs to go on. You know, the tendency of men to isolate, I feel like, is often replicated in organizations that work for men, and that they are, you know, unaware of each other or aware of it, disconnected, or maybe there's some of those tensions you named earlier between folks. And I know that, you know, funding, you know, perceptions of competition for funding dollars can be a part of that, and that's a real thing. So I like having a small vessel for people to come in who are passionate about it and have one more chance to bring their work forward and be recognized. Yeah. How are we doing over there? Any more questions?
I don't have any specific ones in the chat box here. I know that John has to run. Did you have a last question that you wanted to pose?
Lots of diversity in terms of the things that are done at Manology, and just wondering, some of those things seem like that work with any audience as long as your facilitator was good enough or strong enough, I guess. And so I don't know if it's a question, sometimes it's a comment, but you know, like when you're not bound by topic, the fact that your audience is predominantly men, it almost feels like it's secondary, right?
Well, it can feel like that. And I thank you for bringing that up. I wish I'd said that earlier, because that's also an intention. Manology, or for me, any kind of men's work, it's kind of, I think that's one of the ways that the life force kind of goes out of some men's groups, is if you just keep hitting on the same kind of energy, where the theme of, like, we have to focus on men's issues because we're all together as men. And I think men doing something, having an experience together as men that isn't necessarily connected to masculinity or violence against women or any kind of issue like that that's so obvious, it's refreshing, it's fun, it's enjoyable. Yeah.
So you break some of the constraints.
Yeah. And at the same time, like, men doing something like the transformative breath work. Yeah. That was an incredible thing for a group of men to do. Yeah. As men, part of a conscious, intentional men's organization. How much did it really have to do with masculinity? I don't know. I don't doubt that a lot. But at the same time, the conversation we had was not so much about being men together, or masculinity, but that men would allow themselves to be vulnerable together as a group of men, because there was screaming, hysterical laughter and tons of crying that night. Yeah. Swirling all around the space. I know from my improvisational singing work, the power of voice work. And I've never heard men, actually, in 18 years, I haven't heard men sound that way before that night. So the fact that they did know each other, that they did have a shared cultural experience in Manology, there's a shared culture of how we can be. It got pushed into very new territory that night, but it was fairly effortless. It was fairly effortless for them to allow themselves to go into that. So I think that focusing and not focusing deliberately is actually, you know, a strength overall. Yeah.
Very true. Very true. Do you have some other points? Because I'm going to have to snake.
Yes, totally fine. Thank you for your astute observations.
Good to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you.
I'll catch up with you.
Okay, sounds good. Take care, John. Thanks for being here.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
You mentioned that your attendance has been around 15 to up to 40. Was there any specific thing you think that resulted in higher attendance, or was it just sort of a random, just a good weather day or something?
Yeah, well, I really wish I knew a precise answer, because then there'd be 40 there all the time.
Yeah.
It's part and parcel of having an open door. I think it's easy to take it for granted. You've been coming every week, and something else comes up. It's kind of cool to be like, well, I'll do that because I can go to Manology next week.
Yeah.
Certain themes are just, I'm experimenting. It's kind of like being a social commentator in a way, to experiment with themes. But I'm choosing the themes, you know, I have to plan them and get people in order. So they're booked several months in advance. And some sessions we've done have somehow the word of mouth, you know, the social media has gone in a certain direction and hit a group of people who wanted to come en masse. And then there's certain themes that are just endemically powerful. And I also don't want to take the power out of them, or again, make them somewhat stale by hitting them over and over again, and coming back to them over and over again. And of course, we do get a bigger turnout when it's an all gender night. Absolutely. Yeah. And I also, I like the up and down. In the first year of Manology, we didn't have great attendance. We started well, and then actually the Olympics came, and we got shut down for a month right in the middle of our session because our community center became a venue for the Olympics. And so there were nights with just 5 or 6 guys. There was actually one Manology session with just one participant, one guest instructor, the participant, and myself. So at times I felt very frustrated by that, and I actually went back to the Field of Dreams movie and the Couch Slate. If you build it, they will come. If you build it really well, what I wanted to do in my impetuous side was to get mad at the men and be angry at them for not showing up. And I would let myself do that internally, and then I go, okay, I've had a little spasm. What they're really telling me is it's not interesting enough. It's not compelling enough. And so that's my responsibility. That's what I have to learn how to do if this is going to work. I have to learn how to be thinking and inviting topics in a write-up and a vibe about it that just looks interesting enough to ditch everything else on Monday night and show up. And so that was the kind of spiritual discipline for me in the first couple of years, and I really took that on big time. And pulling from all the other organizations I know about, practitioners, how people are doing things, asking them and getting way more intense about asking the men, what do you want? Introducing a feedback system that they could really count on that was more nuanced. No online stuff, like who's showing up, what do you want more of? You know, and that seemed to work really well. So yeah, good question.
And I have a question in terms of kind of comparing your model with some of the other models that I'm seeing, and there's a bit of a slogan with men's sheds, which is a model that's been quite successful in Australia, of men shoulder to shoulder, and this idea that men don't want to sit facing each other talking about their issues, but if they have some other kind of external distraction, you can work on a woodworking project or something that in this kind of less pressured environment they are able to open up and discuss. So it sounds like your model kind of turns that philosophy on its head a little bit. And
no, I'm not trying to turn it on its head. I agree it's different. Yeah, as part of a men's center, I'd love to have a men's shed initiative as part of that. And a lot of the men's shed, so I was at the very first men's shed opening in New Zealand. In 2008, they opened their first men's shed. And I haven't seen one in Australia, but I know about them. And actually, I think John was the one who gave me a research paper about men's sheds based in Australia. And it's highly successful. Yeah, there's a whole, so even Manology, it's just one ripple. It's one version of something that we need. We need zillions of kinds of things for this. And again, I take a lot of learning from the women's movement. There isn't one women's movement leader. And there isn't one kind of thing that you do to be a part of the women's movement, obviously.
Yeah.
So part of the reason that the men's shed worked in its inception was it was an outback thing. It was out where women wanted to get together. This is the story I heard in Australia. Women wanted to get together to connect and to do, to share their crafts, their knitting, their canning, their jarring, and to just socialize. Because a lot of them were lonely. They were out on, extended distances from each other. They had their husband and their children, but they didn't have other people to talk to. And in some cases, depending on the luck of the draw with their kids, they may not have other females. So the men had to drive them long distances to get together, but then the men had nothing to do. So they're like, well, as lore has it, well, there's a shed over there. Next time, let's bring our tools and fix it up. So that's how it got started. It's the story I was told, which makes a lot of sense. I'd love to see something like that going on. And what I saw in New Zealand was a lot of the men who came out for that first meeting, and there was a lot of them. This is a town of 7,000. It's not big. Were retired men.
Yeah.
So I've seen this through Manology and other men's work. This is another whole place that we fail to recognize for women as well. I'm not going to say it's just for men at all. But speaking about men, that a lot of men face a real existential crisis when they're going to retire. It's like it's a loss, in some cases, a total loss of identity. And it goes beyond having something to do during the day. It's like, I don't feel like anybody anymore. And if they don't have a partner, if their partner's in poor health, or if they lose their partner, you guys are from UBC nursing, the demographics around that are bleak. And so a men's shed kind of idea in Vancouver, I think would be a total success, or in any place. I think that's a great idea. And lots of guys don't want to be that intentional. They want to be with other men, but they want to do familiar things, and they want to do it at a different pace. And I support that. I love that. I like doing that as well. There's lots of places I'm drawn to out in the world that are predominantly numerically dominant by women. Women show up more at a lot of the kinds of events or the kind of work that I do. There's way more women involved in education and healthcare stuff. And sometimes I just like being around more men because they do stuff slightly differently. And it's not better, it's not worse. And I think there's a lot of guys out there. So when those guys who show up once at Manology and leave, and I don't see them again, like, yeah, kudos to them. They're looking for something. This isn't going to meet everybody's needs in its current form. And I also don't want to get lost just doing this over and over again. Like, it needs to expand and incorporate other kinds of processes. And retiring and elderly men is another whole area I'd love to be more involved in supporting. Yeah, it's a very good point.
So just a final call to our remote viewers. If there's any last questions, we're almost at noon.
Yeah, bring it on. That's great. There's no questions. Come on, people. I'd love to hear your voices. And any question you ask is going to be great, or a comment too. It doesn't need to be a question. How does this sound to you? What do you think about what you're hearing? Does it make sense? You got any suggestions for me on how I can make it better? I'm really open to that. That's a genuine opening. Do you know in your locale, are there people who might be interested in setting something up like that? Or I'd love to know more, and maybe the others here too, and what's going on in your community for men that you know about. Are there any kind of workshops or courses or gatherings, healthcare initiatives, wellness initiatives? I think, again, one of the things that we could all do in this field is just keep learning about what's going on, even dreams or visions that people have for their community. What would you like men in your community to be? How would you like them to be carrying themselves? One of the things I hear a lot is that people wish that their male friends or partners had more friends and better quality relationships, and more, connection and love and deep friendship. And a lot of the guys who come into Manology will say, this is a fairly common one. I've realized that most of my connections are with women, and I would like to have more connection with my brothers. and this seemed like a place maybe I could try that out. And there's a lot of friendships have been formed there. I have a ton of friends that I didn't have 6 years ago when I started this project, and that was one of my goals for myself too. Yeah. All right, how did our pitch do? Anybody come through?
I don't see any questions yet, and again, there's a bit of a lag time in terms of streaming, but I just wanted to follow up too with the comment that it sounds like you're in the midst of a Manology series right now.
We are.
And if you maybe wanted to just quickly share, you mentioned
Where,
what the next
when,
session is and
sure.
where it is and what time.
So if you're free tonight in Vancouver, Manology happens Monday nights from 7 to 9:45 downtown in Vancouver at the Roundhouse Community Center. If you're coming in on SkyTrain, you can get off a block away, so it's very accessible by transit. It's $13 to drop in, but it's free for men's first session. And tonight we are looking at the session's called Seeing the Whole Man. So we're practicing holistically looking at ourselves, but also men in the community, and specifically around men in the community or the wider society who've been negatively labeled. Deadbeat dad, abuser, loser, et cetera, and trying to imagine that these guys aren't monsters, they're not a deadbeat dad, they're a person who's gone through a set of experiences that's created their behavior. It doesn't excuse their behavior if their behavior has been poor, average, whatever, but it's training ourselves to stop accepting that we write people off, in this case, male people. We practice not writing people off. We practice working with a person who's a full person, who's capable of change, and who has the same basic human needs that you and I do, and that we are also capable of, great acts of creation or destruction, and seeing ourselves in all men. So that's what we're working on tonight. The week after that, we'll be with Don Wright from the Male Survivors of Sexual Abuse organization. I think that'll be very powerful. And then we'll be into an all-gender session and looking at the demonization of male sexuality ? And this is a direct conversational response to the issues with Joan Ghomeshi, Bill Cosby, etc. And looking at is male sexuality being shamed in a way, or where is a conversation that we can have or initiate around the kind of healthy male sexuality we'd like to see in the community. So a few of the things that are coming up.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that. And I do have one final comment, and it was just from Philip Roy, who had posed some of the questions earlier.
Okay. Thank you, Philip.
Saying thank you for raising the community aspect of gay men, which does not always seem to have the equivalent for heterosexual men.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate the comment.
And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank
Yeah.
you for doing this series. And this is great to put these webinars out online and live and let people know what's going on in the community. Thank you.
And again, to our community viewers, that if there's any further responses, that I'm happy to accept in emails and forward them to David.
That'd be awesome.
As well.
Yeah.
All right. Thank
Thanks,
you again.
everyone. Be well.